Good morning. It's August 20th and weather report, still can't see the Rockies. It's smoky. It's supposed to rain today too, but I believe it when I see it. I'm hoping to do this podcast on human sexuality, and at the end I'll have two Indigenous young men talk about a men's group. I think it's important. Most of my topics have been on lately about separatism, politics, stereotypes, pretendians. Well, today, most of my curiosity has been around like human behavior and sexuality, because the whole nature of the question, the big question, $1 million question, is why did Nathan Chasing Horse get away with being such a predator in our communities? Now, I want non-Indigenous people to take a look at it this way. Is like, it's not just an Indigenous problem. This is a humanity problem. And so part of the reason why I do my podcast is to not only educate Indigenous people, but also to have non-Indigenous people understand the gravity, even though it seems like isolated or something profound. It exists in your very communities, but because you do not have a collective and holistic approach or know your community members the way First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities know them, that you can project all this onto like, oh, the neighbor is the one that has the problem type of attitude. When really you have to have some self-reflection, because you don't know your neighbor, or you don't know them until like they've moved in maybe 10, 20 years, or rarely do you grow up with somebody in your community from the time you were babies right until the time you're old age. That's why I do my podcast. So I have a couple of videos, and the two, like there's a psychologist, a psychiatrist. His name is Dr. Drahmed Hankir, and he's talking about. He says the dangerous vulnerability women need to recognize around limerence. He says, you think you're falling in love, but what is really actually happening? Actually, you're falling into limerence, and it's making you ignore the very red flags that could protect you. See, even though I talk about limerence, people just think it's like a magical word. Oh, Marina and her limerence. And I'm going, no, it's a red flag. You know, when I say the word limerence, it should have a red flag saying danger, danger, stranger danger. Like, really, when Nathan Chasing Horse came into the community, I didn't know the name was limerence. And I think that's why I focus on it so much in my podcast. So this doctor says limerence can create an extraordinary powerful pull, idealization, obsessive preoccupation, and intense sensitivity to another person's attention or withdrawal. It can affect everyone, but recognizing your own vulnerability. And this is the point. Like, what is so damn bad about recognizing your own vulnerability? To talk to someone you trust, male or female, about that vulnerability. Now, the majority of times, like that's why I said at the end of the podcast, I'm going to have two young men talk from their own social media platform. The reasoning for all this, like it's everybody, not just women, particularly in relationships where there is inconsistency, manipulation, and intermittent validation, can be an important part of emotional and relational safety. So even when I talk about youth and how to protect youth, we need to have an environment of safety. And the majority of times, like when youth are in school, they have counselors. So it is an environment of safety, supposedly. Now, sometimes it's more dangerous for a child to be at home with their own family. And so that's why when I talk about trafficking, sometimes we don't even know the attitudes that we bring in that are colonially mindset. Even to I always use the premise: don't trust nobody with your child. I'm not saying it because I'm Indigenous. I'm saying it in terms of human beings. Now the doctor says insight matters. Vigilance matters too. Recognizing the patterns before the pull becomes overwhelming. And this is why I truly believe that when women, all women, when they married when they married in trauma bonds and the men were alcoholic or some sort of had some addiction, that the woman suffering as she has children, and then at the same time, like such an organization as Al-Anon was created so that women would have a safe place to talk about their marital problems within a system where other women were experiencing the same experience. But in that whole history of it is that women had this epiphany that, hey, this is trauma bond. Why do we have this emotion here? And they called it limerence, and they started having support groups for limerence. So and again, I'm trying to I'll try to get it as sweet and to the point, because I don't want it to go on like being boring. The notion of infatuation is a normal behavior when you're young and you have this butterfly feelings and all this stuff. But it's one thing that you have so many people who've experienced something and want to say this is common sense. My whole podcast isn't to claim that it's common sense. You have to see it as a red flag in terms of, grasping a hold of yourself and going, I got to self-reflect. Why do I think this way? And again, we do more damage by self-diagnosing ourselves. That's why I said shop around for a therapist or someone who can guide you through this path. Again, the fellow is Dr. Ahmedhanki. And here he is.
Limerence, the dangerous vulnerability women need to recognize. Let's talk about limerence, because recognizing it may protect you. Hi, I'm Professor Ahmedhanki. I'm a consultant psychiatrist, and part of my clinical work involves assessing personality structure and functioning, diagnosing personality disorders where appropriate, and identifying attachment and relational patterns that can make someone vulnerable to experiences like limerence. Limerence isn't simply love. It's an intense, obsessive infatuation where another person can become emotionally central to your sense of worth, safety, and meaning. You don't just like them, you idealize them. You put them on a pedestal and gradually give them enormous power over your emotional state. Their attention feels euphoric, their withdrawal feels devastating, and this is where it can become dangerous. You may ignore red flags or tolerate neglect, inconsistency, manipulation, and abuse, because losing that connection feels unbearable. Limerence can affect anyone, but in my clinical work, I've seen how profoundly these patterns can affect women and why recognizing them can become a matter of emotional and relational safety. Limerence can sometimes be associated with attachment insecurity and earlier experiences of not feeling sufficiently seen, chosen, or emotionally secure. So when someone gives you intense attention or even intermittent breadcrumbs of it, the pull can be extraordinarily powerful. Then one day you look back and think, why did I tolerate that? Why did I abandon myself. This is why insight alone may not be enough. You also need vigilance. If you know you have a vulnerability to limerence, be vigilant when someone produces that intoxicating combination of novelty, intensity, uncertain and intermittent validation. Recognize the pattern before the pull becomes overwhelming. Awareness doesn't mean shutting down your heart. It means protecting yourself while keeping it open. I hope you found that helpful. As always, protect your...
So, this is why, for me, I'd already experienced limerence before I met Nathan Chasing Horse. I already knew the red flags. The problem, though, is like safety in who I was talking to, especially other Indigenous women who were in denial that they've ever had such feelings, such feelings. So when you have a group of people who are in denial of, what can I say? There is a reason why there's such a thing as AA or Al-Anon or any support group, because when you stand up and say, my name is so and so and I am, you're basically using the narrative to validate like self-talk, because you've had so much self-talk denying those red flags. And a lot of people have used catchphrases like healing the inner child, and like it's really, people have made a lot of money off of stuff like that.
Admitted into AA.
So I there's another section of this fellow here. Now, there are a couple of other things that I had seen here. Let's see if this is the one. I'm sorry I keep on doing this. I should have... Here we go.
Hypersexuality and mental health. Hello, I'm Professor Ahmed Hankir. I'm a consultant psychiatrist, and today I want to talk about a topic that isn't discussed nearly enough: hypersexuality. It's a taboo subject, but we need to talk about it, because for some people it can have profound consequences. Hypersexuality isn't simply having a high sex drive. It refers to sexual thoughts, urges, or behaviors that become difficult to control and begin causing distress, risk, or significant problems in someone's life. One of the best recognized causes is bipolar disorder. During manic or hypomanic episodes, changes in brain function can lead to increased reward seeking, reduced inhibition, impulsivity, and overconfidence. For some people, this can result in a sudden surge in sexual desire and risky sexual behavior. This might include multiple sexual partners, sex with strangers, compulsive pornography use, compulsive masturbation, spending excessive amounts of money on sexual services, or crossing personal or relationship boundaries. Hypersexuality can also occur in some people with ADHD, certain personality disorders, substance use disorders, and some neurological conditions. Hypersexuality can affect anyone. However, in a disinhibited state, some individuals may become more vulnerable to coercion, exploitation, trauma, or sexual assault. When the episode or period of dysregulation passes, many people are left carrying immense shame, embarrassment, guilt, or confusion. Relationships can break down, careers can be damaged. There may also be risks such as sexually transmitted infections, unplanned pregnancies, financial difficulties, or legal consequences. It's important to say this clearly. Understanding the role of mental illness does not excuse harmful behavior or remove personal responsibility, but it does help us understand why these experiences occur and how we can support recovery without shame or stigma. Treatment depends on the underlying cause. For bipolar disorder, mood stabilizers can be highly effective. Psychological therapies can also help people develop insight, improve impulse control, and reduce risk. If you recognize yourself or someone you love in what I've described, please don't suffer in silence. Honest conversations with a mental health professional can be life-changing. Hypersexuality can sometimes be a symptom of an underlying mental health condition, rather than a reflection of someone's values or character. Let's replace shame with understanding, stigma with compassion, and silence with honest conversation. I hope you found that helpful. As always,
again, this is why it's important. Like, I'm glad I found this fellow on social media, because when I talk about my life in terms of promiscuity, and understand this, when I'm focusing on youth, it's because I was a teenager, or the reality of like I had a white woman who was quite hypersexual as a child. I mean, she told me stories of how she hitchhiked, and she said, I remember being in the cab of a truck driver and he was driving down into a valley. She says, I don't remember how I came out. So a lot of fragmentations of memory or anything is important. For me, when I say I haven't been sexually active in 50 years, a lot of the lateral violence or the cruelty of making choices in my life had nothing to do with like being bipolar or having there were some other things that I was dealing with, but I had the common sense or the tenacity, because I've never had a partner, and I've had to work and I've had to pay my bills on my own. So I had to be vigilant on my own mental health and my capacity. So that's why I sought out a lot of support for things and how I felt. And the struggle was real because I wasn't trying to be codependent with someone. I wanted to make sure I had effective boundaries, like the people that I was sharing my thoughts had boundaries, and those were professionals. Like this fellow is saying, find some guided someone so that the relapse isn't filled with shame and guilt, and like how you recover. Like I always use the analogy of the potholes and driving around the potholes, and the hypersexuality and the limerence are those potholes, and as you navigate through them. And this is why when I talk about navigation, I'm talking about like my life of not being sexually active. That's navigating. The reality is like even sharing fantasies or sexual experiences with other people, because they themselves still have some issues with talking about healthy human sexuality. Again, they project it onto me. And again, in terms of mental health, in terms of bullying, gaslighting, all trying to minimize my life because the person who's projecting this hasn't sought therapy. A lot of times when I did talk about Nathan Chasing Horse and just the stigma, like something's the matter with Marina, the whole cultural part too of like, she's not married, she doesn't have children, something's the matter with her. Or like, it was so easy for Nathan Chasing Horse to target me this way, that I was chasing him, that I had been obsessive, sending him emails. Again, I didn't even know he had created all this nuance around me. I have sort of sensed it, but when I actually went to the Las Vegas and I talked to his followers and had the validation, because they all knew who I was, which is very powerful in itself. And to me, it brings a lot of relief, because in my community, it's different, because they're comfortable in their own skin. So that's why, like he says, hypersexuality is a taboo subject. And for me, and with my podcast, I'm trying to say, no, it's not a taboo. You have to talk about it. Sometimes when I meet people who are misogynists, and I can feel it, like the way they treat me, and that's fine. But the reality is, a lot of women, again, and I say this, women, when men treat a woman with disrespect, sometimes it just feels normal to her, and she just takes it without any, like, oh, I don't want to disturb, I don't want to get this person angry, like fawning. A lot of the stuff that, even in terms of fantasy or talking with a man that you're sexually attracted to, is not a curse word. And again, it's not a taboo. We are human beings. And so a lot of times too, as women age, our bodies change. And so it's important for women, especially like women who've had children and they have experience with incontinence. There's a lot of things that I've talked to women that I didn't realize because I have never had children. So all the more reason why for me talking about estrogen therapies and the reasoning for it too, because our bodies are meant to be sexual. And the longevity of human beings means that you need to be sexual right until the last breath you take, right until before, like when you're 6 feet underground, you're not going to do it anymore. But we're such sexual beings that our whole physiology is geared to all that stuff, estrogen, testosterone, oxytocin, dopamine, all that. It's like a plant. You need to fertilize it. And, when you shut down and you don't participate or you become rigid and all these things that they talk about, intergenerational trauma and all the diseases that come with it. I mean, a lot of people do due diligence and they do try to take care of themselves. But a lot of times, for me, when I do a critique and they don't like what I'm saying, they'll ghost me. So yes, my life can be pretty lonely, but welcome to the club, right? So here.
Historically, you'll notice that in paintings that depict royal power, generally in the West, kings would have themselves painted in very upright positions, wearing armor, holding weapons, conquering lands. Whereas in the East, often, they would have themselves depicted as lovers, actually in positions of pleasure or intimacy. Sometimes it would be with just the one woman, maybe a favorite mistress, but more often they'd be shown pleasuring 5 or maybe even 6 women at the same time, with the emphasis firmly on pleasuring the women, not controlling them. So was this because different cultures imagined power differently? See, in places like ancient India, kingship was not just about conquering. It was also a king's job to ensure the fertility, the prosperity, the abundance of the land. And so a kingdom where the rains fell on time or the crops were abundant or even where lots of children were born was seen as a reflection of its ruler. Virility was political language. A king who was able to pleasure women, multiple women, was actually a statement on his ability to sustain the kingdom. And so the lack of it, meaning a king who wasn't virile or someone who indulged in sexual excesses and sexual assault, because the rules were very strict that a man in power had to have sexual ethics and be able to control his appetites. But yeah, a man who either wasn't virile enough or was sexually unethical was seen as a bad omen for the kingdom and could be denied the throne. Never underestimate the power of a woman's pleasure. Kingdoms have been lost over it.
And that is
historically, you'll notice.
And that is from a lady. Her name is Seema, last name Anand. And it's really interesting because, when I talk about matriarchy and the power of women and just how powerful our bodies are, because when women sort of say, well, Marina, aren't you worried that people aren't going to believe that you haven't been sexually active all these years? And I'm going, no, this is my truth. This is what I feel comfortable in. This is who I am, and this is how I evolved. And when people say, well, what is your mission in life? Well, my mission in life started 50 years ago. And most of the time, too, when I talk to my niece, she's an artist, and she'd do some graphic design. I said, anything that any human being takes up, you have to put at least in 10,000 hours to master it. So in that sense, when you say, well, what is my mission? Just self-reflect, and see how many hours you put into something. That in yourself is your mission. Is your mission. Now, I think this.
Sadatvam Kantasya Priya Bhavatu, which means may you always be your lover's sweetheart. Or in other words, we bless you with a lifetime of reciprocated love. I mean, how gorgeous is that? Traditionally in India, as a woman, the blessing would be, may your husband have a long life, meaning, may you have the good fortune of always being a married woman, which is, of course, also a beautiful blessing. But in the ancient Sanskrit plays, which were primarily romances, this was the the more popular blessing that may you always be adored by the person that you love. And you have to agree that is probably the most beautiful thing that you can wish for anyone. Now, of course, there are many versions of this particular blessing, but I've chosen to go with this one because this version is gender neutral, meaning that no matter what gender you or your partner are, this can apply to you. Plus, this can be for you now, or it can be for you sometime in the future. And so, repeat after me. Sada,
Sadam,
Tvam,
Plum,
Kantasya,
Kantasya,
Priya,
Priya,
Bhavatu.
Bhavatu.
Sada Tvam, Kantasya, Priya, Bhavatu. Which means,
Like, just the understanding of that, like, it's so powerful. And you know, like I said, the when a woman chooses to have children and that the child's life takes up her identity for 5 years, the first 5 years of that baby's life. Now imagine if you like I knew one lady who had 20 babies. Like imagine like just her whole identity. And then when she stops having children, like the the notion of pleasure and understanding the nature of men and women, but for women to be assertive in understanding their own bodies, their own body parts. It's like even like I said in terms of estrogen therapies and stuff. Like it's important for people to, like, especially women.
Hypersexuality and mental health.
Does anything?
No, I'm sorry. Like I said, there's this other lady. She's talking about, again, sexuality.
Postmenopausal women have the highest rates of UTIs. Over 100,000 women are admitted into A&E with UTIs and chronic UTIs. And nowhere in the clinical pathway did they mention topical vaginal estrogen. Because fundamentally, we still do have, I believe, this misogynistic view that this is how, because it's men's medicine, it's part of the process. We have lied to women over two things. And actually, you say I don't get angry, but these are the two things I get angry about. One is that we've lied to women about their pelvic floors and said to them, just do pelvic floor exercises. And if you leak after having a baby or you have an oops moment, don't worry, it's okay, here's a pad and you can treat yourself. Actually, no. There are two times in our lives when we reduce estrogen. One is when we've had a baby, and that's when we are lactating, so we are breastfeeding our baby, and our pelvic floor is, for love nor money, you can do as much pelvic floor exercises, and I'm not discounting pelvic floor exercises. I do them, and I encourage people to keep doing it. But that's only 50% of the argument. Estrogen is the other bit that you need to give women. So if you get a woman in your surgery who says, I'm breastfeeding and I'm totally getting irritation and soreness and I'm getting an itch, please don't treat her for thrush. Because that's the other mistake that we make. You need to give a topical vaginal estrogen, and it's known as genitourinary syndrome of lactation. So there's a lot of doctors who are sort of talking about this, but still very quietly in the women's health sphere. And it works wonders. So now my midwife colleagues, I'm teaching them in their NCT classes going, please talk about vaginal estrogen. The safety data is phenomenally good. So it's so local, so it's localized. It doesn't get taken up in the bloodstream. Therefore, doesn't increase your risk of breast cancer and does not increase your risk of clots.
Does that also mean that a woman, say, in her 60s, late 60s, 70s, could she start taking vaginal estrogen? Because I know it's maybe not so good for somebody to take HRT more than 10 years after you've had your last period.
Systemic HRT, so something that goes throughout your whole body, there are conversations and guidelines, but I never say no. I always talk to individual women on that. Topical vaginal estrogen, lifelong. At any point you could start. So I've started women in their 80s and it's been a game changer for them. Postmenopausal women have the highest rates of UTIs, over 100.
See, this is important for women, especially aging, because when I talk to Indigenous women and I'm talking to them about this estrogen, vaginal estrogen, they're just like, they want to change the subject, and yet they've had children, so the whole reality of like, what is it that your body goes through, and this lady is talking about it. And and even too in terms of masturbation, like for women, even the sex toys, the whole process of stimulation is important. It's important right until, like I said, you take your last breath. And a lot of times, like when I talk to women about menstrual periods throughout my life, and this is what I try to get across to people, not just women, but, well, I don't talk to men about menstrual periods. But when I talk to women, and I said, because again, I've never had children and I've never been with a partner. When I've had my monthly period, it just comes monthly. But I noticed as the years went by that when I was sexually aroused by a certain man, or I was infatuated, or like I said, I've gone through this whole limerence or infatuation, limerence or hypersexuality in my early 20s, like my late teens, early 20s. So a lot of what I talk about in terms of my emotions of loneliness, isolation, sadness, I don't, it's just like at some point, I'm there working and I'm interacting with people, and then I have my period, and when I talk to women, I said, don't you, like, it's one thing, like I've had roommates, and even in high school, like, or when I was in residential school and we were living in dorms, like all the women would, their menstrual periods would fall in sync, because again, we're talking to each other, we're living with each other, talking different topics, sexual arousal, but the nitty-gritty of it when it comes to partners. And this is what I'm trying to say to women. No matter how old you are, your libido doesn't shut down. You will still find somebody attractive, and you'll still feel aroused, and for lack of a better word, horny. Now, as you get older, and again, people stop having their period, going through menopause and all this, but and again, I don't think women totally understand it if they're have been in relationships and like they're not really in tune with their bodies, because like for me, the only relationship I have is with myself. So yes, when I would think about somebody that I'm attracted to and it's intense, I will start my period. When my late uncle passed away at the age of 35, his oldest daughter was like, I think about 13. Just the intensity of the energy, what they call the energy, the central nervous system. Like I said, when our thoughts and how our central nervous system is attached to our very existence, just the grief of losing her dad, she started her period. And there's more to it too. Like I try to talk about ceremony too. Like in the Sundance, women who are in their period aren't allowed to come within the circle. Like you have to be away from your period a few days as well. And this is a cautionary tale, because I'm talking about the intensity of the energy, the male energy that's involved in that Sundance. And so that's why I'm talking about when it comes to interacting with men and you're attracted to them, it will trigger this part of your body as a woman to start your periods. So I'm at a Sundance. I'd finished my menstrual period. And I didn't realize I needed to be away a little more. I didn't know that because I was new to this. And I slept within the circle. I woke up. I was sharing an airbed with another woman. And I woke up, my body moving as if I was having intercourse. And it woke her up and woke me up. And I thought, what happened? And because I had this wet dream. And it was because I shouldn't have been within that circle. It was the intensity of the drumming and the singing and just that whole male energy, just how do I put it, dispersing with like a lightning storm. You see a flash of lightning and you hear the sound. Well, that's what I'm talking about in terms of collective and holistic approaches to healing. And only if you've been in such like positions, and I know a hell of a lot of Europeans and wannabes and pretendians try to artificially have this. You can't. It has to. There's a collective holistic approach to this, and sometimes people just sort of glorify the person who's in charge because they think they're all magical and mystical when it's all biological. So that's part of the reasons too why I talk about healthy human sexuality and the whole nature of women looking after themselves, and that it's not a shameful thing to ask the doctor to prescribe you vaginal estrogen. It will increase, like again, UTIs. I didn't realize, like again, women who've had children have incontinence a lot earlier. And so as you get older, you develop UTIs and you go on antibiotics. The reality of like what happens when you use so much antibiotics after 6 months, like forms of depression. Like I tried to stay away from antibiotics. I even tried to stay away from sedation, or like even when I need operation, I'd sooner be awake and have a local anesthetic because of the chemicals that stay within the brain like for 6 months. And again, as we're aging, we need to be more visual or cognizant of the things that happen to us as we age, like dementia and Alzheimer's. And so, again, a lot of the things that I talk about is because I'm aging. Yes, I have fears of dementia and Alzheimer's, and I have to be diligent. So for me, going on estrogen, vaginal estrogen, as my doctor said, "Are you planning to be sexually active?" I said, "No, I'm doing this for longevity. I want to live a little longer, okay?" Because the stark reality that when women are elderly or even younger and they have UTIs, sometimes even if your body gets so used to antibiotics, those UTIs can become sepsis, and you can die from it. You can die from sepsis. So that's why it's important for me to have this podcast. It's not a taboo. It's not something to be ashamed of. Human sexuality is like this lady said in India. May you have pleasure. Even the reality of again, even men in position of power. Europeans, they sat upright in the throne, whereas in other cultures they're lying down in sexual positions, because again they know that the importance of women. So, and I know a lot of people want to romanticize Native American and like the whole like the flavor of the month. That's why when I talk about slavery and I talk about racism and I talk about systemic racism and I talk about like the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations, the whole history of dominance and colonizers trying to enslave us, because why look at us as we're not fit to be slaves? We're not strong enough to be slaves. You kill off thousands, all the buffalo, for native Plains Indians who were 6-7 foot tall, and then all of a sudden, over a couple of generations, we've shrunk. Our DNA shows how tall we were, and you can see that in parts of the world where different groups of people have starved for generations and how they've shrank, and then as they get nutrients into their body, how they grow. Again, like I said, our bodies are like gardens. We need to feed them and nurture them in every aspect, not just eating, but also spiritual. So anyway, let me get to the last two men that I found very interesting in terms of what they had to say when it came to women, especially since they're young Indigenous men. Now, here, this is Dallas Dallas Goldtooth. This is the handle is All My Relations Podcast. And I don't know the fellow he's talking with, but I just found that it's important. Like when I was talking to a young man yesterday, and the way he was talking at me, I'm trying to say to him, a lot of the conversations that I'm having with you, I can't answer because I'm not a man. Like a lot of a dialogue that needs to take place. And he says, oh, well, I have brothers. And I'm going, no, you like, if it's one thing men talk to men, it's important for women too. But again, it's the quality of the conversation and what you're talking about. You're not like hello, if you're a misogynist, you're just going to keep on talking about it. But anyway, here's this podcast with two young Indigenous men.
Always talking about, Western patriarchal, and this is very prominent, attribute within them, but it's also within our own people, and our own men are the perpetrators doing this stuff too, right?
We have to reimagine how we relate to each other. And we can't do that unless we have this conversation about how do we hold each other accountable, how do we hold men accountable.
Have a protocol. How do you approach this man that you find out this guy's a public-facing guy? I get people tell me all the time, you're still associated with so-and-so, and he just cheated on me too last month and this week, and he's with this woman and that woman, and you're over here posting with him and talking about him. It's up to us to think about and have a vision for what is manhood for me. How do I act in community? What sort of social etiquette do I abide by? What are my cultural values, my moral values as a man that, I've learned through history, but what are the ones I've created for myself? Mm-hmm. And what are these morals that I hold other men to in terms of standards of my relation?
Now, like I said, it's sometimes when we talk about things, it's important to be able to have healthy Indigenous young men, be open about these things.
How do we build a system to where we pull men back in?
When does a man deserve restorative justice? At which crime that he committed against natural law, against kinship, what degree does he deserve restorative justice, and for how long, and who determines when he is suitable to come back in the community?
Oh man, it's so messy. I want to be messy. I want to be messy on this.
That's what this conversation entails.
Traditionally, when we say somebody trespassed, violated the terms of community to the highest degree, for our people, banishment was one of the big. I struggle because I'm like, if we banish every creepy guy,
it's a lot of them.
In Indian country, there's 5 dudes left. There's a lack of acknowledging what we don't know. The lack of humility of saying, you know what? Let's be honest, that nobody alive today knows the lived experience of how our ancestors lived in true Indigenous governance and sovereignty. Taking that leap to acknowledge that opens up an avenue saying, okay, we have space to grow from that, to generate it from that. Because I think what is sometimes used as a way to stop growth in generations, saying, oh, you're not doing it the way we were supposed to do it. You're not doing it the way we did it. That's how patriarchy in exhibit to limit our growth.
Oh, my relations.
Isn't that amazing? It could limit our growth. This is an important conversations that I truly believe in, because again, this person, Dallas Goldtooth, knew Nathan Chasing Horse. So these young men, they're not talking off the top of their heads. They're talking about the reality. What is restorative justice? And so even within Sutana, when I talk about restorative justice and transformative justice, and I use my brother as an example, my brother who was a cohort of Nathan Chasing Horse. Now there are a lot of them, and still exist today, that haven't been prosecuted. However, when people look at me and they know who I am, and again, excuse me, my brother, I'm not defending what he's done is unforgivable, yes, but the reality of it is how is he accountable for this? And again, this isn't something new. It has to be talked about, because we have leadership. We have a former chief who'd been chief for decades, And even like right now he's involved in this lawsuit. Like all the money and and this fellow was poor. His family was poor. You know, a lot of times when people would look at my family traveling to India and South America, we were poor as well. But whatever notion they thought that brought shame to their families, that they had to go through politics and do political things to get to where they're at, to the point where they hurt people. You know, people say, well, hurt people hurt people. Yes, but sometimes I don't even think people who are hurt, they're so ashamed that they've been hurt. They don't want to feel it. They want to continually be involved in their active addiction. And however it started, however it bloomed from childhood to teenagers, in my community, like this fellow, he's still going to go to court for two historical sexual assaults against men. This is a man who raised his children. He had a son who committed suicide, a daughter that just died this year. He remarried, and like all this company that he had in relationship to Enbridge, an oil company, and even his relationship to Daniel Smith. Again, there has to be some accountability. So when I talk about pretendian and I talk about what do you call slavery, and I talk about like even the color of a person's skin based on colonial constructs, or even with black women, like when they had the slaves and you had the darker skinned girls and the lighter skinned girls. So you had the ones who were, you know, housekeepers, and you had the dark skins. Like the reality of it is there were fancy boys and fancy girls who were the prostitutes. And again, a lot of people, you know, when they were breeding farms, it was typical. You had they divided the slaves, the children, into different categories based on how they appeared. And again, you've got to do the research. The genetics of what men give to their sons. I don't know what the gene is called. I know there's mitochondria and other stuff that women pass to their daughters, and there's stuff that men pass to their sons. 60 to 70% of that DNA of Black American men is European. So you got to understand that's coming from a European father. These people bred their children to be slaves. Now, when I say Métis, these Europeans bred their children. Okay, and the Canadian government, during the time when they were enslaving, and they wanted to have control over Indians, especially in Canada, create the Indian Act. And the Indian Act, again, is trying to eliminate Indigenous people by whitening us. And so they basically took a lot of fancy children, put them in industrial schools, and then all of a sudden this epiphany, they're going to go home and marry dark-skinned girls, and those girls are going to convert them back into savages, and all our efforts to have hired hands in ranching and farming is going to dissipate. Like poo-poo, uneducated white people, and this is why when I talk about white supremacy, I'm going, the biology, the history, understanding why people are different than others and accepting our differences and learning from them. The amount, in 500 years, the amount of our bloodline being shared all over the world is the greatest. If it weren't for that, like people don't want to look at it in terms of genetics. But even just look at what the Europeans did to the Black American men in the United States. I'm trying to talk about matriarchy and what it is that as Indigenous people we contributed to the world. Not only just the agriculture, like 60 to 70% of all agriculture around the world that people are eating comes from the Indigenous people of the Americas. Like all the pyramids, there are more pyramids in the Americas than there are in Egypt. So everything to oppress, suppress, or hide who we are as a people is percolating to the top. And even when they talk about restorative and transformative justice, that in itself is like, I know Black people talk about it, a lot of people talk about it, but when you're actually having to, like for me, our leader, he whatever happens, if he's found guilty or not guilty, and there's a lot of other things that are happening, just not with the sexual assaults, but also in terms of criminal, like money stuff. Whatever happens to him on the outcome, the justice outcome, this man will be coming back to Sutina. And so how do we make him accountable? What is that restorative justice look like? And again, these topics have to be talked about because so many times, these things, like this young man says, these men were talking. We don't know historically in our Indigenous history of what restorative justice was, but we have to have the dialogue, the discourse. We have to talk about these things that are uncomfortable for us. But at the same time, there has to be accountability. I know my brother has accountability. He knows that. Just the relationship within the siblings and the things that the shame and the guilt. That's why it's important for me. There's no restorative justice for Nathan Chasing Horse. Like the young man talked about banishment. We had one fellow, like I had mentioned in one of my podcasts, that I helped clean up a murder scene, and that fellow was banished from our community because the crime was so horrific. Again, restorative justice. So the reality, like he's still a nation member. He's still, has we still had to have a relationship with him, even though he wasn't living in our community. So again, because he has family here, he has children here. And again, this is my brother too, who has, family and siblings here. So, again, poo-poo on the white man's system for, creating prisons. The majority of times when our young men go in, and women go into these prisons, they come out worse. No respect for women, more misogynist than before. And so when we talk about accountability and men doing this work, like men having conversations like what these two young Indigenous men were talking about, like what is it and how do you handle this in a community where people come up to you and challenge you and say, well, why are you doing this when that person did this and this and this? So, for me, when I think about a time when a lot of people come back into our communities who have done crimes, the restorative justice and how it looks, like even the serial rapist who raped me, he every day he goes to a dealership on Blackfoot Trail, sits there, has coffee with total strangers, has no friends here in my community, our community, because again, and this is what I try to say to people, if he was a serial rapist, I was only the youngest out of like over 10, 13, 14 victims that the RCMP had interviewed. I can't even comprehend or imagine the older women in my community that he sexually assaulted who refused to press charges. However, because I took him to court and he served time, now that he's been publicly outed, nobody will talk to him. No, he's just shunned. He's not banished from our community, but in a way he is, like psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, he's banished. He's physically here, but he is banished. And that's what I'm talking about, restorative justice. Sometimes it hasn't to do with some bitter female who wants to, castrate all these men. It sometimes it's just restorative justice within the community, making judgment or passing judgment on the individual. We'll use a white man's analogy. Look at, what's his name, Ted Kennedy. He was having an affair with his secretary and they plummeted off a bridge and she died. Based on that, he would never be successful in politics. The general public already cast judgment on him. And that's like restorative justice in a very broad sense of how people come across a consensus. So that's why the topics, especially when it comes to men who are doing crimes of sexual assault, men who are doing crimes against children, it's important. But I'm not I'm not neglecting that women are perpetrators as well. All the more reason too why I think some men just hate women. I know my younger brothers were sexually assaulted. One was they were sexually assaulted by women and also men. And again, these things have been happening to people and communities with white people. Like I said, this lady who ghosted me, upper middle class, hitchhiked around, obviously had been sexually assaulted, totally, she says, I'm 65 now, I don't need to deal with this shit. She doesn't say the word shit, but, for me, it's important to talk about these things. Thank you.